Good morning, I'm here with Julie Grabham from JGHR and we are going to be talking about bullying after last week's incident, shall we say? I don't know what to call that. After last week's government handling of a specific case, we just thought we'd hop on today and talk about bullying as in the workplace and what the impact is. So welcome, Julie.
Hello, Hayley, and welcome to HR from my shed.
I love it. I love your shed. I think it's fab. So today we're going to be talking about bullying. So tell me a bit about what, how does this fit in the workplace and what's the impact been from last week's sort of...
Okay, well, I think first of all, it's very disappointing. I think that's the first thing I would say is what happened is disappointing on a couple of different levels. The message that I got out of it was very negative messages. And again, on different levels. So negative in, this is a personal point of view and obviously from a HR point of view, it came across to me that the leader of a workplace, and it doesn't matter what your workplace is, whether it's the government, whether it's a factory, a shop, an office, it's a workplace and people have the right to be respected in a workplace. And I felt that the leader of that workplace, the boss of the workplace, shall we say, Boris Johnson, to me the message he gave was bullying was acceptable. And he also gave me the message that the report, as they called it, I would call it an investigation in HR, but the outcome of the investigation clearly stated that the person involved in this didn't meet the company standards. And Boris Johnson, the boss of the company, has said, that's okay, that's okay. And so to me, that message was negative on a lot of levels. And I think it's a worry. I think it's a big concern. We're going through a pandemic. We're going through lots of behaviour changes. We go into a phase where people are asking for support. And then they're seeing the leader of the country, the leader of the bigger, a very important workplace saying that behaviour is okay. So I would be concerned how vulnerable people in our own workplaces would be feeling.
I know from the different professional places I worked and the different types of places, these messages are really important, aren't they? Because I worked for a domestic violence charity, and one of the things that we used to talk a lot about was historical rules, and one of them was the rule of thumb. Now, even though that doesn't stand today, and there's some sort of debate over whether it was a realistic rule or not, but that rule does still stand today in terms of reinforcing to people who are abusive that it's okay to hit other people. The rule of thumb is you could hit your wife with a stick no wider than your thumb. That's allegedly what the rule says. But there are still men and women who are using that as a reinforcer to say that their behaviour is okay, to justify it. So a message like that from our leader, our country's leader, that's going to be really impactful for victims of bullying.
And I think also, I totally agree. And then also you've got social media, how quickly the messages come across on social media. And if you're feeling vulnerable yourself and you've been in that position in work, social media can either become your friend or your enemy, can't it? It's either your lifeline out of the place that you're in, or it can become the place that actually puts you in a worse place. And if you're seeing almost like, this is okay for somebody to act like this, you're then going to look at your own situation and think, oh, well, I can't speak up now. What's the point of me speaking up?
Yeah. And
is this acceptable?
It has, bullying historically hasn't always been dealt with well in the workplace or in school environment. Are we any better now than we were? Is this...
Well, I think this shows us not. This shows us that we're not. Yeah. One word that we hear in schools and the workplace is a term, you're talking about rule of thumb, zero tolerance on bullying. Is that something we just pay lip service to? We pop in a policy to make us look good? Because this is what this tells me that we're doing. It's not what I'd like to think is happening in workplaces. I know of a few, obviously I can't tell you the details, but I know of a few bullying incidents, and how managers deal with it is shocking. But that's because they've never not been shown how to deal with it. So there's a huge call for training on how to, always got to call on training on people management, well-being in the workplace, etc. But also actually identify and handle bullying, because identifying bullying is a big one.
Well, they brought in the law, didn't they? I can't remember if it was last year or the end of the year before, about coercive control. So having worked in that environment. I understand quite a bit about coercive control. And the police always said it was very difficult to bring a case to court, which I can understand, because it often is one person's word against the other. And bullying often is that, particularly in the workplace. I would imagine it's not very common to find physical bullying in the workplace. It would be more, I might be wrong.
No, you're right. It's more about behaviours.
Yes,
yeah?
verbal and psychological.
Yeah, it's more about behaviours. And it's more about perception of that behaviour as well, and acceptance. And I think going back to the Piri Patel case then, we've got other Conservative members, and I will mention, if I'm allowed to, you've got Andrew R.T. Davis, who's actually come out on Twitter and said she's a strong leadership, needs stern words, and she's a strong-willed person. That doesn't mean that you have to bully somebody, Hayley. We can all be strong leaders. We can use stern words. I accept that. We can't always be nicey. Sometimes we have to be a bit sterner.
Yeah.
That's fine. But what we always have to do is accept the standards of all of our workplace and work to those standards. And those standards should not include shouting, throwing things, and bullying. And it's unacceptable.
Yeah, well, it is, and I just wonder, has it been accepted in that environment, and is that now the culture then? Is the message that he's giving us telling us that the culture in the government is that you can really treat people however you want to? You don't even have to consider.
Well, if you think about the government, and if you think about their setup, and especially the parts that we're allowed to see, so if you see the debates that they have, then it's very much a shouty place, isn't it?
Yes.
And it is one of those things. If you shout louder than somebody else, you get heard. Yeah. So it's not a case of, if we were to have a meeting in the workplace, we would expect to sit around a table nicely, have an agenda, and talk nicely. In their environment, it's, if you don't agree with whoever's speaking, you shout at them. That's what we see in televised, and I guess, and in other environments we see it and we accept it. And you're talking about, I think there's a few different things. It doesn't mean I approve, but we're talking about a woman in a very much male-dominated place here, who is seeing and witnessing people shouting all the time, and maybe she felt that that's how she has to act. That's the mold, that's the culture.
And the culture is so important. You said earlier about zero tolerance, and we do hear that a lot in terms of bullying, particularly in schools, but I'm sure it's bandied around in work. But what does that actually mean then? What have they defined what zero tolerance actually means, and how they would enforce that? It's
supposed to mean that we don't accept it, point blank. It's supposed to mean that. But this proves that we do accept it in the workplace. Yes. It'll come down to interpretation. And I'm not saying, there's a lot of people saying she should have been dismissed and this, that, and the other. Now, that's not for me to say, because when you do an investigation into any allegation, you have a look at that person, whoever has been accused, and whether we say, yes, you were wrong, but we look at that person as a person as well, because it might be that they needed support. So it could be that dismissing them isn't the right answer, but it might be that they need more coaching, support, behaviours, etc. So I'm not saying that I think Boris Johnson should have come out and said dismiss, like a lot of people are shouting for, but I think he should have handled it better, to at least have made a statement to say, I agree with the report and further action will be taken. Yeah. What further action is up to him, as a boss. But I think that, because that's how we would do it in the private sector. Isn't that sort of the right way? Well, I think so. I mean, that's certainly what my clients would do, so I certainly would say it's the right way. I mean, the other problem I think we've got with what's happened is he's had what we call in HR an investigation. So an investigation's been done, and the outcome of the investigation was that Piri Patel didn't accept and work to the standards of the company. And yet Boris Johnson has basically dismissed that outcome, so much so that the person who wrote the report has resigned. So he's actually undermined and undervalued a very trusted person who took time to investigate. So the whole process when we do investigations, that's actually put to one side now. So what's the point? What is the point in somebody investigating if the boss doesn't trust that person? What can workplaces learn from this? What can they do to ensure that
they're as good as they can be. Because I do think zero tolerance may well be overreaching, because we talked earlier prior to the interview about coercive control. I just spoke earlier, did I? Coercive control, and it's a tough thing to manage. So bullying is often about that, you know, behind closed doors, or even in an office where it's quieter. But how can workplaces do the best? How can they ensure they're doing the best they can?
Well, I'm going to use a word that I use quite a lot when I do HR for my shed, and it's communication. So I think leadership, as we mentioned, leadership comes from the top down. So I think the leaders of our companies, our bosses, our managers, we have to communicate that bullying in the workplace is not acceptable. And we need to have that chat, rather than it just being a policy that we roll out, put on the shelf, put on the internet, what have you. It has to be a conversation that we have, you know, the bullying is not acceptable. And maybe, like you said earlier about defining zero tolerance, but also defining what does bullying mean to us? Because we spoke about this before. Some people won't call it bullying, will they? If they think they're okay, they'll call it banter. So, you know, so it's actually defining, is it banter, is it bullying? Is it acceptable, is it not acceptable?
And where does that, you know, my talks consist of this banter, because I think it's important for mental health and well-being that people understand where the fine line is. And my take on the fine line of bullying and banter is that relationship you have with that person. You can assume you have a relationship with them, a good relationship with them, and be having a laugh, you know, and it's only banter. But if you don't have as good a relationship with that person, or you don't understand what that person's going through, and you say something, you are edging into bullying potentially. So it's a very, very fine line. And I love a bit of banter myself. And I like to set my own boundaries that by reading people, which is often something we can't do if bullying is taking place on social media.
Yeah. And that's another topic, you know, that's another topic in itself, isn't it? You know, but banter to me, the word banter to me can sometimes be a cover or a blanket to cover up bullying. So it's the go-to word when somebody has offended somebody, always brought into a meeting to say, actually, you know, we've had this complaint about your behaviour. Oh, it's okay, it's only banter. Yeah, that's the go-to. And then it's how do we define what's banter? And again, as we said before, to me, one person's banter is another person's bullying. It's how you interpret it.
Another thing, I'm a bit of a closet Radio 4 listener in the car when there's no children in the car, because they do quite a lot of sort of articles and things and quite nice things. They were talking last week about this, and there was a lot of older people ringing in to the programme, and one lady and one man minimised, and that is a massive thing in domestic abuse, you know, minimising behaviours and in bullying. It was only, it's just, and those words for a victim, well, you know, they were only, it only named, you know, called you a name once, because they were trying to say that bullying has to be long term. I'm not 100% sure that's true.
No, I don't think that's true. And I also think a lot of people's perception of bullying is that it has to be physical, but it doesn't. I think mental bullying, as you know, you're professional in this, you know, mental bullying has a long-term effect. You know, talk about social media. If somebody is bullied on social media, I've had personal experience of that. I've seen friends going through it. Once that person closes the laptop, those words that have been written and read don't go away, Hayley. They stay in your mind throughout the night, throughout the next day, you know. And as I say, social media can be your friend. It can also be an enemy if you're not in a good place.
And if you can imagine life not being great, and then you have to go into a workplace where somebody is shouting and screaming, that alone can put you into anxiety. That you know, that kind of environment where you know that no matter what you do, you could get sworn at, you could get shouted at, you could get something thrown at you. That's an awful environment to have to go into, particularly if you need your job.
Yeah, well, definitely. But also, we think what bullying is, and we say about the shouting or the throwing. But to me, it's also this, should we call it silent bullying, where it's actually just undermining somebody all the time, maybe taking jobs off them or giving them jobs that they shouldn't be doing. There's other ways that people can have that control, if you like.
And I think communication is it's a free skill, isn't it? And it is something we have to learn. We have to learn how to communicate properly with people. And I don't think social media is very good at encouraging positive communication. But I do think it's something that if we learn about communication, all the layers of communication, because communication isn't just about speaking to somebody, it's about what environment you're creating. How does your body react when you're communicating with somebody? Because if you have a tough body language and you turn yourself away and you're trying to tell somebody and it feels off, that can feel extremely uncomfortable. And people will say, oh, well, you have to be uncomfortable in work sometimes, but to be made to feel uncomfortable,
To me, strong leadership isn't putting that control over, it's having that good communication skills, being able to listen. I think what we've lost through social media, and I might be wrong, this is just my opinion, we have lost the right to have an opinion, but to debate. Where we've got to is you're either right or you're wrong. You're either on this side of the fence or you're on that side of the fence. And I think social media has encouraged that. You quite often we see a lot of polls, don't we? What do you agree with? Do you agree with this or do you agree with that? It doesn't open up for debate. It's just you're either on this side or you're on that side. We had it with Brexit. That got quite nasty. When you're seeing some of your friends posts on Facebook about Brexit, the accusations there. If you voted one way, you were labelled this. If you voted that way, you were labelled that. You're thinking, actually, I don't think I am that, but I voted that way or that way. Makes you start questioning yourself. And if you're in a vulnerable position anyway, that's not good. That really isn't.
We've got a lot of environments that aren't doing us any favours in terms of human connection and understanding and respect. You said respect earlier. Where is the respect of somebody who shouts and rants at people? Where's that respect? Well,
there is some. Again, we spoke about it off camera earlier, wasn't it, about Gordon Ramsay? Somebody who's built his reputation on shouting, swearing in the workplace. Doesn't matter if it's a kitchen, that is somebody's workplace, and there's programs that he's built a reputation on doing that. So it's obviously acceptable because people are doing that and finding it funny. I think we are at a stage now where we are trying to educate the younger people that bullying shouldn't be allowed. And then we've got highest person in the country, Boris Johnson, actually saying it's okay. That particular behaviour was okay.
So if you could give a few tips to people, whether it's just maybe adults or a workplace, what would you suggest that people consider if they are putting policies together for anti-bullying, or what would you suggest that they think about?
I think we need to think about our own environment. So what we don't have is a bullying and harassment policy, say for an office, exactly the same wording as what we would for a warehouse. I'm not saying that we accept different measures, but we have to define what our environment is. So we would then look at again that word communication, and I'd say get the people's buy-in as well. Get people's buy-in. What do we think is acceptable, and what don't we think is acceptable? Some people might think, you know what, it doesn't bother me if you shout. I'm okay with that. I'm okay if you're shouting, as long as you're not shouting at me, because that can be a difference as well, can't it? And I think we need to look at the support out there, because what we're going through this year, 2020 has been a completely different year to what any one of us could have forecast. I don't care what anybody says. 2020 has been challenging, but it affects our behaviours. We can be that strong leadership in the workplace, but we still have a lot of personal things going on. We still have, we talked about control earlier on. Control's been taken away from us. We're now living in a country where a couple of weeks ago when we had fire break, not only was we told where we could go or where we couldn't go, we were actually told what we could spend our money on. Couldn't buy some non-essentials. And look how quickly that blew up. And that blew up because people are under stress behaviours. So once we're in the workplace as well, we still have all that personal stuff going on that we're dealing with, and that can affect our own behaviours. I think more support is definitely needed. I think HR will admit I think we'll admit that well-being in the workplace, mental health is really important, and it's something that should have been identified a long time ago. But I'm hoping that this year now, certainly bosses and managers themselves are realising anybody can suffer, anybody can suffer from it. So actually, we have got great resources out there, and we should be tapping into that.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about funding and that, Hayley, hopefully the government will put that funding in place to realise that one of the outcomes of this pandemic will be the long-term effects of people's mental health, which will and can result in bullying.
Yeah, and even, I can remember an incident when it kind of relates to bullying, but when I was really unwell, when somebody needed more out of me than I'd sort of planned for my day, I found it really hard to cope. So there was a coach, my son's football coach, and he wanted the kit back, which is, that's fine. He should have the kit back. My son had left. But I turned up on the night. I wasn't fuming with him, but I was fuming. And my I'll never forget. I'm so sorry. I'm not that kind of person. My attitude towards him it stunk. It was rude and quite disrespectful. And even 5 minutes after I realised what my behaviour was like, but I wasn't in a position to go back and apologise. But knowing that if I was going to work and those pressures were piling on constantly, my behaviour potentially could have escalated very easily. And I think the stress this isn't about making excuses, this is about understanding that the stress that people are under, particularly with this year, with everything that's going on, somebody who has never been a bully or displayed any kind of bullying behaviours can become a bully, but equally somebody who has never been vulnerable is vulnerable to being bullied.
Yeah, and I think there's quite a lot of things we can carry on talking forever on this subject, but I think you can be vulnerable because you're loyal, you're that go-to person, so you can be then exposed to somebody acting towards you that shouldn't act that way. But I also think when we're talking about bullying, I think there's a couple of things we need to cover. So it's, how do you identify that somebody is bullying you, and what do you do? Where's your support? What can you do for that? Let's try to do it before it escalates so bad that you have to take time off work for stress, because that's what we are seeing. We are seeing a lot of work-related stress because of how people are being treated. So we need to stop that from happening. It's no good for the person involved. It's certainly not good for the company. And it's not good for people's finances either, because a lot of people that go off on work-related stress will only have SSP, so that's your statutory sick pay. So if you're only having that, there's that knock-on effect on how you're feeling at home as well, isn't it? The anxiety levels. So that it's a bigger issue than just having an argument at work or having that bit of banter that's crossed the line. But I also think what we don't look at is, how do I identify in myself if I am bullying? So how do I identify my own behaviours? You've just said it yourself, how you reacted, and you knew that you've done wrong. And I'm sure we've all done that. I've certainly done it. I mean, I'm great when I'm typing out an email, but I can walk away, leave that email, and then go back and think, if I was to read that in that person's mindset, would I read it the way that I meant it to be read? No. Delete, send again, or pick up the phone. That type of thing. So I think as individuals, is there a course available that we can actually identify our own behaviours? So what do we normally like? And is there a line that if we start behaving like this, we can do something ourselves? Or can we be more open? And I don't want to say criticism, or I hate the word feedback, but can we be more open to somebody actually saying, hey, Jill, that's not you. Why are you behaving like that? Or that's not acceptable.
And that's the start of a supportive conversation, though, isn't it? Because it may well be. So say that day I approached this coach with that man. If that had been in the workplace, and somebody might have said to me, do you know what, that's not you, are you okay? I may have, at that point, opened up and said, you know, I'm not doing so well.
But we're not very good at doing that, though, Hayley.
And maybe, this ties in really to that supportive conversation, whether it's mental health, bullying, whichever angle you're taking, a supportive conversation around, do you know what, you've been off a little while, it doesn't seem like yourself, or you haven't been achieving, is there anything I can do for you? Even that kind of conversation.
Yeah, we're not having those conversations, and it's more difficult now because a lot of people are working from home. So you're not having that little chit chat by the coffee machine that you might have had before. You know, we're not seeing that. The only time we're actually seeing people is when we're doing a Zoom call. And for a lot of people, Zoom calls, are anxiety levels go through the roof. You know, I might be working out of my bedroom, or I might be working out of the office, where my husband might be working, or the kids might be there. Or I might be flat sharing. I might have 3 or 4 other people working from home. And I've been asked to do a Zoom call. So we're doing a Zoom call, and normally on a Zoom call, we're actually talking about the subject that we've done the Zoom call for. We're not having that. Everything okay? How is that?
And you can, because you're only seeing sort of this much of a person,
yeah.
It doesn't feel right to say, I'm really not, across the screen, you know, in that.
I don't think you will. I don't think you will so much. And especially a lot of Zoom calls now, to be fair, are not one-to-one, are they? There's normally more than one person on the calls as well, because it's for a reason. You're doing a Zoom call for a reason, not a catch-up call. When you're in the workplace, you will have those general chit-chats. So if you're going to make a cup of coffee over lunch, you have the general thing of, even if it starts off with, what did you watch on TV, and did you see that behaviour?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we watch now. I love I'm a Celebrity. Get me out. I love it, you know. I love it even more so now it's in Wales and it's in a castle. But I love that. But we've seen in the past on that programme, haven't we? We've seen accusations and allegations of bullying and people's behaviours, and how really then you get almost like a group thing where people will side with one or the other, and that becomes bullying in itself.
But I think we've kind of got that now with the country, haven't we? That people are either going for, you know, she wasn't a bully or she was a bully. It's a horrible divide again in the nation.
It is. And, you know, I would never ever condone bullying. You know, I'm up against my profile picture on Facebook, I've changed that now to I'm standing up against bullying. But I also think you have to look at the person who is perceived to be the bully. And see what support they can offer. You know, this isn't a case of hanging somebody out to dry. This is a case of looking at that person as well and seeing there's got to be a reason for your behaviour. You know?
There's often, you know, one of the things that I talk about when I talk about bullying with children, that there's not a lot of differences between the bully and the bullied in terms of self-esteem and confidence. It's just the way in which that manifests itself with those different people. So the bully often needs to take control and will use those behaviours to take control of something or someone. Whereas the person being bullied, their self-esteem and their confidence levels are low equally as the bully, but they become more vulnerable. And it's a big one.
And I don't know whether we're right on this, because obviously we're not, you know, HR, we're not mental health experts, we're not well-being experts, you know, we signpost people for that, you know, but we often see a pattern that the people who are doing the bullying, when you really dig down, it's because they feel threatened by that person, and that could be threatened because they're good at their job, yeah, and so rather than identifying, well, actually they are good at these bits, or they're better than me at these bits, so they can actually help me in my job, they don't see it like that, they see it as, you're after my job. So therefore then comes the undermining, maybe the shouting, but certainly an exclusion is a massive thing. You know, we hear that a lot, especially with women. Yeah, we do still hear with women. A woman will join a company, etc., and maybe in school, girls in school are excluded from a little gang or a club, not made to feel as welcome, and that could be a way of somebody controlling. Yeah. And you wouldn't see them as an out-and-out bully, would you? Just because they haven't been invited in. No. They might still be being perceived as a nice person. And but to me, if I'm excluded, I feel bullied.
It's very easy to get people on board as well, isn't it? To people who don't, and I was talking about to my children about this. It's easy when you portray something a particular way from your perception. You're not lying. You know, perception. Even in this case, right? Perception is a wonderful thing, but it's also quite a bad thing as well, because no matter how many people in a room, we all have a different perspective. So we all see things from a different viewpoint. So when there is some kind of isolation, or there's people who are gathering other people on their side, you kind of sway their perception. Well, you know, you saw that she did that to me, that's why I'm doing this. Well, yeah, I did see that behaviour, actually. I did see that she was rude to you or whatever. So I can justify, I can see why you would see.
You don't always see the bigger picture, do you?
You don't. And it's
And what we don't do then is we don't look for the solution on how we can make it better. What we're doing is we're just deciding whose side of the fence we're on. So as I say, go back to Andrew R.T. Davis making that statement. That might be his opinion, but maybe he would be better off saying, but I don't think that behaviour is acceptable in a workplace.
That hasn't.
And how can we improve it?
Well,
and what's happening? Yeah, go on.
What you were saying there about people saying that behaviour is not acceptable, that hasn't been said yet by anybody.
But isn't that quite the case as well when people apologise? I'm sorry if I offended you. Well, actually, you know you offended me, so please don't put the word if in. So it actually dilutes the apology.
Well, somebody said something, part of an apology was something along the lines of, I'm sorry if my behaviour upset you.
Well, is that word if? Well, you know my behaviour upset you because I actually put a grievance in against you.
Yeah.
So I complained about you. So you know, so there's no if about it. Your behaviour did upset me. And that's not an opinion, is it? Because if your behaviour's upset me, it's upset me. It doesn't matter if you intended it to or not. Yeah. It actually did upset me. So how do we move forward on this? And I think this is, as is shown today, it's actually opened up a healthy debate. Yeah. And hopefully, and that's where we need to get back to.
Absolutely.
So we can say, none of us agree with bullying, but we might all have different levels of what we think is acceptable.
And I think that one of the important things you've said today, which you don't often get in a conversation when I hear conversations about bullying, is actually going from the bully perspective, and that's something I think is important in schools, because there are many schools, and I've worked with many children where the schools aren't dealing with bullying well, with a zero tolerance policy. They don't seem to be able to manage it, or I don't know where the problem is, but I do think the important thing is identifying all the people involved. So whether it is the bully and the bullied, whether they are just the two people involved, or whether there are other people involved in it, and actually understanding from everybody's point of view. Because
I don't think schools are very good at that, Hayley. I mean, I've had personal experience of that with one of my granddaughters, who was bullied. And she actually ended up leaving a Welsh medium school and having to go into English education when she'd been in Welsh medium all of her life. And she had to leave that and go into English just before she sat her GCSEs because the school didn't deal with the bullying. So, it can have a lot of long term.
Is it as
She's doing great. She's doing great.
And that's wonderful, because is it as hard to deal with bullying as we're making it then?
I don't think it should be as hard. I think it is hard because I think you still have people who don't want to accept that it goes on. So, you'll have your schools, you have your businesses, you have the government. No, bullying doesn't happen here. We're all a happy place to work in. We're ticking all our boxes. We've got a policy in place. We've got processes. Yes, you have. But are you following them? Are you just paying lip service to them? So if somebody is saying they're being bullied, whether we agree that they are or not, that person feels they're being bullied. So there's an issue. Yeah, there's an issue. And I think going back to the bully, I'd like to think nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, yay, I'm going to go and bully somebody today. I don't think that happens, but something happens to make them behave in a way that they do. And it's finding out what is that behaviour.
I think I've heard a lot of conversations around how, you have that one person in an office that is labelled as that person. They're the person that nobody challenges on their behaviour. They just accept that is how they are.
Yeah.
Now, that for me, that shouldn't happen. I don't think that if somebody is offensive, rude, racist, sexist, however they come in across, if that is detrimental to other people in the workplace, should they be challenged, or is it that people find it too difficult to challenge somebody who's been allowed?
I think there's a couple of things there. I think the individuals would be a little bit maybe afraid to challenge without that support backer. And again, we're here to talk about Boris Johnson, so I'll keep mentioning him. He hasn't backed up his own employees. Yeah. He hasn't backed up the person that did the report. He hasn't backed up the victims with the allegations. So if you don't feel you're going to get that backer, would you speak out and put your own job at risk? So, we all work for money. Yeah? People say I'm passionate about HR. I love my business. I do it for the money as well. You know, it's got to be a driver. Let's be honest about it. So if I'm in that position where I'm in the workplace and I'm feeling bullied, and I've seen it happen before, and people have said, oh, it's okay, that's how she is. Don't mind her, that's how she is. That's what we get told, as you said. Am I actually going to put my job on the line, knowing that if I say something, the spotlight's then going to be on me? That person knows I've spoken out against them. Other people will know I've spoken out against them. Am I going to get excluded? Am I going to stop my chances of promotion? Where is it going to get? It's a big picture. That's a big picture for somebody to have to deal with, you know. So unless I know that that support mechanism is really there, despite what it says in the policy, unless I actually know that that support is going to be there for me, I'm not going to speak out.
In terms of the policies then, how easy is it to create a workable anti-bullying policy and harassment policy?
It's easy to create a policy. It's actually implementing it is the difference. Okay, and we can say that about any policy. Yeah, we can say that about lots of different policies. Probably the ones that get implemented the most are your disciplinary policies, you know, and your grievance policies, because they are the actually working ones that you would. The other ones that are there and they're on a shelf, and very little, I would say, some managers might not even know the content of them, you know, as a working document. And I think that's where we need to get. We need a policy to back us up. That's how we work in this country. We need a policy to back us up. But actually what we need is people to understand what's acceptable and what's not. And I think that, again, we're going to come back to that word communication. You know, we have to buy into it. It's not just something that we say because it's one of our company values. It's not a statement. It's not our mission statement. It's actually what we do. We want to be happy in work, but we have to accept we can't all be happy all the time. Because that's not natural, and we are all allowed off days, yeah. But maybe we need to have a safe place for that. You know, that if Hayley, if you talk to me and I think, whoa, hold on a second, that's not good. Maybe there's a code word I can just send you in a message or something to say, not acceptable. Yeah. I don't think the word not acceptable is easily welcomed.
No.
I think it's language again, isn't it?
If
you was to say to me, Julie, that's not acceptable, would my defence barriers go up straight away? Because you've actually said the words not acceptable. Whereas, like you said earlier on, if you said, Julie, you okay? That's not like you. Are you all right? I'm more open to that. But it's not an easy hurdle to get over this, you know.
No, but I do think we need to continue with it though, don't we? We need to be keeping going with getting to a point where it's not acceptable in the workplace, that it's not, you cannot go into work and do whatever you like. That's not, the world isn't like that, and it shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be able to bully.
You should be able to do that in school. You should be able to do that in your family environment, should you? You know, you shouldn't be able to do it at all. But I think let's look at the positives then, okay? So that's one thing, you know, the company's JGHR solutions, we look for solutions, we look for positives. So what this has done is actually highlighted that, yes, some people might find it acceptable, but we don't. So let's open this back up in the workplaces. Let's have a debate in our own workplaces about, do you think, you know, if I came in and I started shouting and swearing at you, do you think that's acceptable? And maybe that's what good will come out of this, is that we can actually encourage workplaces to talk about it and bring bullying back in the spotlight in a good way.
Yeah.
To say, actually, we know it's still going on and it's going on in the highest places.
Yeah.
It's so not just something, yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think talking, but you know, all the things that are taboo, all the things that we don't talk about, let's talk about them, because it has a massive impact. So what I'm going to do is, you'll send me all your details for JGHR Solutions, and I'll get them I'll post this out on different social media platforms, and we'll put your details there. So if anybody wants to get in touch with Julie to just find out a bit about their own company and what they can do, and how they can maybe tighten those policies and procedures. And
if you've got a policy, a lot of companies are, you know, panicking now because they haven't had policies and contracts of employment, the whole set, if you like, you know, they haven't had those in place. They haven't got the guidance in place in the first place.
And maybe, you know, if there's training out there for people to understand a bit more about bullying, just please do get in touch. Let's have those conversations. Let's open conversations and let's talk about bullying. Let's make it so that if you are a victim of bullying, it's easier to go and reach out to somebody in your workplace.
And I think maybe should we add into that as well, there's another third party there, if you're a witness to bullying. So you might not be the bully, you might not be the victim, you might actually be somebody on the sidelines who's seeing it and not quite sure what to do about it.
So let's have those open conversations. Let's, both Julie and I are open to having conversations, get in touch. Julie will put all her contact details on all the posts, so you'll be able to contact her for sort of HR advice, and hopefully we'll keep talking about it.
And work together on it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for today, Julie.
Well, thank you for asking me. I've enjoyed it. It's been nice to have a chat.
It has been good, yeah, thank you. And I'll speak to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.